very much, and thank you so much, Omar and Francis, for inviting me. I'm really delighted to be here. Just reflecting actually on the really interesting discussion about the role of the media. It's part of my job to do a fair amount with the media, and I think the only time where I feel I've been profoundly misrepresented was in an interview with the Daily Telegraph where I was talking about Muslim students and terrorism. I think it's the only occasion where I read the piece and just thought that is not a fair representation of what I said. And I suspect that's not a coincidence, either in respect to the Daily Telegraph or in respect to the subject I was talking about. But anyway, what I want to touch on this evening is a few issues from a university perspective. I want to look at how universities are seeking to reconcile these fundamental obligations that they have to support Muslim students and promote good campus relations, and yet behave in a responsible way in responding to the dangers of violent extremism, and yet allow free speech and open debate. And anyone who thinks that balancing these issues is straightforward is naive and simplistic. These are really difficult issues, and universities, like all of us, struggle with this. Yes, of course they get it wrong sometimes, but there's a genuine commitment, I think, to try and get that balance right, but my goodness, it's not easy. However, I want to start by making the very obvious point that the vast majority of cases, Muslim students tell us that in universities they generally feel valued and welcomed, and universities do understand what adjustments and support needs to be made, and they do it. And from a university perspective, it goes without saying that Muslim students are hugely valued, absolutely valued alongside all other students. And I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that generally universities are quite rightly regarded by students, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, as being fantastic places to study. So we shouldn't let these sorts of problems and issues get out of proportion, because it is only in the minority of cases, I believe, that there is conflict and there are problems. So, having said all that, I think it is fair to say that at Universities UK we do acknowledge that despite that generally welcome and positive environment, there is a reality that is anti-Muslim discrimination or Islamophobia. It certainly does exist. It's just that I don't think it is hugely widespread. I'll be interested in your views on that. We, UK, fund Equality Challenge Unit, an organisation I used to run before I took over at UK, and one of the bits of work that I initiated, but then I had to leave, was research of the experience of both staff and students on the grounds of religion and belief, to try and find out what the reality was from their perspective, from the students' perspective and the staff's perspective, in terms of their experiences on campus. And this was done in 2011. The student sample was 3,935 responses. So, I mean, clearly not comprehensive, but nonetheless, I think a sufficient number to be significant. And of that group, 336 were Muslim students. And they told us that 92% of them said that they felt that universities provided them with an environment in which they felt valued and welcomed. However, 50 Muslim students said that they had experienced harassment and discrimination. That, quite frankly, is 50 too many. And clearly, given it's not a comprehensive sample, the number who have experienced discrimination and harassment is highly likely to be larger than that. And I think those sorts of findings fit with research that the US has carried out, which reached similar conclusions. So, although I think we mustn't get out of proportion that this is a widespread problem in our universities, it is there, it is serious. Universities have got to do more. We acknowledge that, to make sure it is completely eliminated, because it has no place in our campuses, and that's precisely why UK funds Equality Challenge Unit to take these sorts of things seriously, to take these sorts of things forward, but it's also why we at UK feel so strongly about these things, and indeed why I'm here this evening, because I think this is an issue of fundamental importance. Secondly, and an entirely separate point, UK does recognise the reality of global terrorism and violent extremism, whose evil tentacles stretch right into our society, including inevitably into universities, because universities are a reflection of society. However, our position at the UK, and we've been criticised for this, but nonetheless it is our position, is that there is no evidence that universities are any more likely to witness violence extremism than anywhere else. But it is in our society, and therefore it does exist in universities too. So like all responsible organisations, universities have to play their part to combat these trends. And at the UK, David knows, we have a separate project supporting the government's Prevent programme, which is collating good practice, identifies initiatives, and draws together evidence-based, reliable materials and case studies to be disseminated throughout all of the UK's universities. This is obviously an extremely serious area of work, and we know that we are working very closely with AUS, Anti-Deep Process and other organisations to make this particular project as effective as it can be. Third principle, which is fundamental to the UK, is that free speech is of profound importance for universities. We are, as a matter of definition, places where extreme, even radical views can be expressed in a safe and open environment. And I would like to reclaim the words radical and extreme as being entirely words. There's nothing wrong with that, and indeed they should be supported. And some of those views may indeed upset others. We may disagree with them. But hey, that's what universities are about. And the best way in which one can express one's disagreement is to listen to other views with respect and challenge them. Now, of course, there are limits, and when those views undermine the rights of others on the grounds of gender or race or homophobia, or when they incite racial hatred, whatever it may be, then that goes beyond an issue of free speech, and universities have to take action to try and prevent those views from being expressed. But we have to be vigilant about drawing the boundaries of free speech too narrowly, and we particularly mustn't outlaw extremist views when they do not infringe the law, they do not offend other people's rights, and we must ensure that we are striking that balance in informed, sophisticated and evidence-based ways. So there we are, three fundamental principles that universities take extremely seriously. The problem is when they conflict and how you strike that balance. And as I say, we don't always get it right, and it is extremely difficult. At one extreme of what is, after all, a spectrum, there are violent extremism. I use extremists, and I use that word quite carefully. It's when the violence comes into it that I think all of us will acknowledge that it has to be wrong, has to be eliminated, and I doubt anyone sitting here will disagree with that. But extremism that is not violent may or may not be wrong, and it's important not to lazily conflate the two descriptions. At the extreme end, we have violence extremism, and that, I should say, in no way is defined in terms of religious ideology. It's certainly not defined by reference to Islam. In our freedom of speech report that UK published, we made it explicit that violence can be linked to all sorts of activities. And we absolutely at the UK do not support the view that there is something intrinsic about Muslim students at university which makes them more likely than others to become violent. That is complete nonsense, and we do not subscribe to that view at all. Nonetheless, we do need to recognise that some violent extremists do operate in universities, and some of them are linked to Islam, but there is absolutely no automatic link, and it's fantastically dangerous to assume that there is. What is more prevalent, however, is the expression of extreme or radical views, and the question that we have to ask is, at what point do those extreme views, which in itself may be fine, start merging into a form of extremism that compromises other people's identity and threatens their choices, which is not fine? How can universities allow the former but prevent the latter? And I want to finish by making two points here. But again, as I said before, these are difficult issues, and I'm not pretending that universities always get them right. I think the first point is that what we've always got to make sure about when we're talking about these issues is that we don't revert to assumptions that essentialise whatever it is the group that we're talking about. And I'm not just referring to Muslims, Islam, religion or race here, across the piece, lifestyle, politics, gender, disability, the same danger is always present. And I think we have to be very careful about vocabulary and how we articulate our arguments here. But secondly, I think it's absolutely critical that universities make sure they've got clear and transparent procedures. I was very concerned about what colleague down there was saying that they were treated differently to other student societies by the university. That simply is not acceptable and should not be allowed to happen. But thirdly, and most importantly, we've got to engage with universities, have to engage and listen to individuals and groups affected, engage with full respect and talk to, in the context of Muslim students, Islamic societies and of course to FOSIS, which brings me to my final point. We at UK hugely value the contribution that FOSIS and Islamic societies make to the life in universities, and I think in terms of trying to get the balance right between all those different principles that I just described, engaging with Islamic societies and FOSIS to help us is really, quite frankly, the only way forward, and it's by working closely together that we can attempt to shift what is a very destructive and reductive narrative that's particularly propagated by the press, as we just heard, to something which is altogether more positive and truly reflects the contribution that Muslim students make. So on that more positive note, can I finish and just say how much we value what the work that FOSIS and Islamic societies do. It's absolutely integral to the success of universities, and long may that continue.